The story begins deep in the Appalachian mountains where silence clings to the trees and shadows fall heavier than the sun can chase them. In this wilderness stood the Hollister family, a name whispered with unease from one town to the next. The people of the valley avoided their cabin because inside was not a home, but a prison where generations of secrets rotted in the walls, and every whispered rumor turned out to be true. The girl at the center of this darkness was Mary Hollister, a daughter born into a world where love was twisted into chains and obedience was demanded by blood. Her father, William Hollister, was no ordinary man but a patriarch who believed the world outside was unclean, that outsiders were enemies, and that his family existed only to serve the bloodline. Mary grew up not knowing kindness, not knowing choice. Her childhood ended before it began, because William had already chosen her path. He decided she would not belong to any man outside their cabin, because she already belonged to him. Mary's first memories were not of playing in the field or hearing lullabies, but of being told her purpose. Her father said the blood of the Hollisters must remain pure, untouched by strangers. She believed it because to question him was dangerous. He spoke like a preacher and ruled like a tyrant. His eyes never left her, and as she grew older, she realized the truth. He had not raised her as a daughter. He had raised her as something else, something she could not escape. When Mary turned 12, William began calling her his wife in the same way Elma Harmon did generations later. But to the Hollisters, this was no scandal. It was the way things had always been. The family said nothing. Neighbors who saw her belly grow round whispered but never acted. They said the Hollisters were cursed. They said God himself had turned his face from the cabin. Yet no one climbed the hill to stop what was happening. No one dared. The children Mary bore were sickly, twisted reflections of the sin that made them. They came into the world weak, some never surviving the first night. Those who lived carried the marks of a bloodline folded in upon itself. Bodies bent, eyes vacant, minds trapped in silence. And still William insisted this was destiny, that Mary was fulfilling a sacred duty. To him, she was not a victim. She was proof that the Hollisters were chosen. But Mary felt the weight of every birth. Every cry that faded too soon carved scars inside her. Her body weakened, her spirit hollowed, yet her father's grip never loosened. He had stolen her childhood, her future, her identity, and left her with only the curse that carried his name. What happened inside that cabin was not just tragedy, it was a warning whispered through the hills, a story passed from mouth to mouth, that when family becomes prison, when blood becomes law, and when silence becomes survival, what is left is not love, but ruin. Mary Hollister was born in a season of hunger and cold. The cabin walls leaked wind through every crack, and her mother's face was already lined with exhaustion. Her mother was not just a wife, but also a cousin, taken young and broken by too many births before her. The world beyond the cabin never knew Mary's exact beginning, because there was no paper, no witness, no record. Her life began in silence, and that silence followed her like a shadow. She grew up in a place where laughter was rare, and where every word was measured against the anger of her father. William Hollister carried himself like a prophet. He was tall and gaunt, his voice heavy with conviction. His sermons were not spoken in churches, but at the dinner table where his children sat in fear. He told them the outside world was wicked, that only within their bloodline lay salvation. He called it God's command, though it was nothing more than his own hunger for control. His children believed him because they had never known another truth. And those who dared doubt him vanished into silence, punished in ways the others were too afraid to describe. Mary's childhood bed was a pile of straw, shared with siblings who were also cousins, brothers who were also uncles. The lines of family blurred until they disappeared. The rules were simple. Obey your father. Do not leave the hills. Keep the bloodline pure. These laws were carved deeper than stone because they were enforced by fear. William ruled with his fists and with his words, both carrying the same weight. His children were not raised. They were bred. As Mary grew, her father's gaze changed. She was no longer a child to him, but something claimed by destiny. He whispered that she was chosen, that she would continue the line, that her purpose was holy. Her brothers looked away. Her mother wept in silence. The cabin became a world where her future was no longer hers. At 12 years old, she was taken in, not as a daughter, but as a wife. The family did not resist because they were bound by the same fear that bound Mary. She carried the weight of generations on her small shoulders, and she understood that her suffering was not an accident. It was tradition. By the time Mary reached her teenage years, the curse of the Hollisters had already marked her body. Her face grew pale, her eyes hollow, her steps heavy from carrying burdens no child should know. She gave birth before she understood what motherhood meant, and her first child was born weak, its breath shallow, its cry fading before the morning came. William called it God's will. Mary called it silence. She buried the infant in the woods behind the cabin, with no marker, only earth swallowing another secret. The family spoke of it as duty. They said the child was offered back to heaven. They told Mary she had fulfilled her role even in failure. For William there was no grief. He simply demanded she try again. The bloodline must continue, he said. The will of outsiders did not matter. The shame did not matter. The world beyond their hill did not matter. Only the family, only the blood. Mary had no choice. She obeyed because disobedience was met with cruelty. Her second child lived, but not whole. Its eyes wandered, its limbs twisted as if the bones had never settled. Its voice never formed words. It cried through the night, a sound that echoed like something not fully human. Still William raised it high in his arms. He called it proof of purity. He told Mary she was blessed, though her body was breaking from the strain. She looked into the child's eyes and saw not a blessing, but a curse that stretched back generations. The neighbors whispered again. They spoke of strange cries carried by the wind, of figures seen limping in the woods, of a girl too young to be a wife. They avoided the Hollister land and taught their children never to wander near. The Hollister name became a warning spoken in hushed tones like a curse. But inside the cabin, none of this mattered. William believed himself untouchable. He had built his kingdom on fear and silence, and in that silence Mary's life slipped further away. She was a vessel then, nothing more, and each day her spirit grew thinner, even as her father demanded more children, more proof, more sacrifice. By the time Mary was 16, the weight of her father's rule had carved deep lines into her soul. Her body was frail, her hair thin, her hands trembling with every task. She had carried life and buried it more than once, and yet William's pride only grew. He boasted that his bloodline was strong, that no outsider could judge him, that the Hollisters were chosen by God. His chest swelled as he looked at the children, though each one bore marks of a curse, bodies bent, minds clouded, eyes vacant. Still he saw them as proof of his legacy, while Mary saw only shadows of pain. Neighbors began to fear the Hollisters, not with respect but with disgust. They avoided the paths leading to the cabin. They told stories in town of a man who called his own daughter wife of children born broken of screams in the night. Carried by the wind, mothers warned their children to stay away. Men crossed themselves when the name Hollister was spoken. The family was no longer seen as reclusive, but as damned. Mary felt the change too, in the rare moments of quiet when William slept and the children whimpered in the dark. She let her thoughts wander. She imagined leaving the cabin, walking into the woods, and never returning. She pictured roads leading to towns where no one knew her name, where she could breathe without fear, where her body would belong to her alone. But the thought was fragile, crushed, each time William's voice thundered through the cabin, each time his hand struck her, each time he reminded her that she was nothing without him. Her breaking point came one night when her sickly child gasped for air, begging silently for relief. Mary begged William to seek help, to let her take the child to town, to find a doctor or medicine. But William refused. He said the child's survival would prove the strength of their blood. He struck Mary when she wept. He cursed her weakness and told her to trust the will of God. In that moment, something inside her shifted. For the first time, she felt not just sorrow, but rage. It was small, trembling, hidden, but it was real, and with that rage came a dangerous thought that perhaps her prison could be broken, not by escape, but by ending the rule of the man who held her in chains. The winter that followed was colder than any Mary had known. The wind cut through the broken walls, the firewood burned too fast, and sickness clung to every breath. Isaac, the child who had survived, grew weaker, his cough rattling through the nights, each sound a reminder of the curse pressing on the family. Mary begged again for help, but William only muttered about strength, purity, and destiny. His eyes burned with pride, but his hands trembled from drink. His voice was still fierce, but his body had begun to betray him. Mary watched. She waited. Her thoughts no longer drifted toward escape, because she knew the valley would never let her go. Instead, she studied William's weaknesses, the way he drank too heavily, the way he slept too deeply, the way his anger blinded him. She held her silence like a weapon, sharper than any blade. She carried herself with obedience, but inside her chest a storm was gathering. One night, when the snow buried the hills and silence stretched over the world, William collapsed drunk by the fire. The bottle slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor. His breathing was heavy, uneven. He looked less like a prophet and more like a man undone. Mary stood over him for a long time, her hands trembling, her eyes steady. She thought of every child lost, every wound hidden, every night stolen. She thought of Isaac coughing in the dark. She thought of the years of chains pressed around her soul. When she moved, it was not with fear, but with decision. She pressed a pillow over William's face and held it there. His body thrashed, but her arms did not release. The fire crackled. Isaac coughed, and Mary's breath came steady until the fight ended and the room fell silent. She stood in the quiet, not weeping, not afraid, simply present. For the first time, the weight of her father's rule was gone. When the cabin fell silent after William's death, Mary did not collapse. She did not run. She sat with the body of the man who had stolen her childhood, her body, her very name. She looked at him not as a father, not as a husband, not as a prophet, but as a man who had finally been undone by the very silence he had forced upon her. The fire burned low, Isaac wheezed in his sleep, and Mary felt something she had never known before. It was not joy, it was not sorrow, it was freedom. She knew that freedom came with no salvation. Isaac was sick, his body frail, his mind clouded, and the bloodline was already broken. The valley would not forget what had happened in the Hollister cabin, even if no one spoke of it out loud. Whispers would carry the story from one town to another. Mothers would tell their children to stay away from the woods. Men would lower their voices when the name Hollister passed their lips. The curse had ended one life, but it had not ended the legend. Some say Mary buried William in the woods where she had buried her children before. No marker, no prayer, only earth swallowing another secret. Others say she took Isaac and walked into the snow until the forest swallowed them whole. No record tells the truth, only whispers remain. But all agree that Mary had broken something that night. She had ended a cycle that seemed unbreakable. The Hollister name lived on not through birth records, not through family trees, but through warning tales. Theirs became a story of ruin, told to remind people what happens when power turns inward, when blood becomes law, when silence becomes survival. In the hills, the curse of the Hollisters was no longer just their own. It was a reflection of what fear, obedience, and isolation can create. It was a mirror showing the darkest corners of human control. The legend of the Hollisters did not fade with time. It became a shadow that clung to the valley, shaping the way people spoke of family blood and power. In the coldest nights, when the wind rattled the trees, some claimed they could hear the faint sound of a woman breathing steady and unbroken, as if she were still pressing against the silence that once tried to suffocate her. It was not a ghost in the way people usually feared, but a reminder of a choice. A breaking point where one woman had decided she would no longer be a prisoner of the bloodline. Generations later, children were still warned not to wander too deep into the woods. Parents whispered about Mary Hollister as if she were both villain and savior, a woman who destroyed the man that had destroyed her, the story twisted with each telling, sometimes painting her as a murderer, other times as a mother protecting her last fragile piece of life, but always carrying the same lesson. When family becomes a cage, when blood becomes chains, love does not survive, only ruin. What made the Hollister story endure was not simply its horror, but its truth. It was not just about one family in one valley. It was about what happens when silence is forced upon the weak, when traditions become weapons, when the natural bond between parent and child is poisoned by control and obsession. The tale carried the weight of warning, the memory of suffering, and the echo of a woman's breath, refusing to die out. In the end, the Hollister name was erased from records, but never from memory. The valley itself seemed to hold on to it, carved into the land carried by the wind, a story told around fires when the night grew heavy. Some say that if you walk those woods, you can still feel it, the heaviness of a curse, the remnants of a family destroyed by its own bloodline. But if you listen closely beyond the whispers, beyond the fear, you may hear something else. The quiet sound of resistance, the echo of Mary's breath, steady and unyielding, a signal that even in the deepest darkness, silence can be broken.